Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I wonder if I could just say on behalf of the International Diabetes Federation how delighted we are that this conference is taking place, and to thank Dr. Alwan and his colleagues in WHO for organizing it, and in particular to thank King Abdullah and the government of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for hosting this important conference. We're very delighted that it's taking place. And it's my pleasure now to introduce Professor Fiona Bull. Fiona is from Australia, but is currently the visiting professor in Loughborough University, which is very well known for its preeminence in sport, and the University of Cambridge, also in the UK. Fiona is a recognized expert on physical activity and all the health that brings in public health terms, and we're delighted to welcome you today.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, Your Excellency, the Ministry of Health, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, other ministers, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be here at this important meeting and to bring to the presentation the topic of physical activity. I'm delighted to see its positioning as one of the 4 core risk factors, and I'd suggest it's in relatively recent times that the area of physical activity, exercise, sports, has been recognized in this domain as fully as it is today. I'd like to start with my 4 or 5 key messages. I hope to remind you and convince you the evidence is strong on the health benefits of physical activity. Like the speakers before me, today's meeting, over the next few days, it's not so much about if or why, but in fact how. I'd like to introduce and remind that public education is an important part of our response to physical activity and all NCD risk factors. However, I will suggest that physical communications, mass media on physical activity is necessary but not sufficient on its own. We must look and implement activities and actions upstream. The solutions to address physical inactivity will require policy as well as programs. And finally, my 5th message is that we need to build the evidence base in this region. We have a strong evidence about the health benefits, but I will acknowledge that we have evidence gaps around population-level interventions showing the changes that will be necessary. We need to act on what we know and build an evidence base in doing so. We also need more capacity building in this area. And as one of the questions this morning has already addressed, we need to consider carefully the social desirability and the cultural adaptations in this region towards this risk factor. Let me, over the next 10 minutes, expand on these 5 points. The evidence, it is strong. Back in 1953, when Jerry Morris published his first paper on the benefits of being active during work with the London busman, through to the political declaration of last year, we have 60 years of evidence on the health benefits, and this morning's presentation have shown you the attributable risk, and it is a major concern. Most recently, a special issue of The Lancet with 5 papers looking at what we need to do. I draw your attention to this new resource. A reminder, this is a simplified picture, but it sums up the picture of the benefits. Following the yellow line, any activity is better than none. Activity in this regard can be through leisure, through recreation, through sport, but it can also be through transport, a major area of focus in Europe and elsewhere, walking and cycling to get from place to place. In addition, there's work and domestic-related physical activities, but I'm going to focus mostly on the first 2 because they are modifiable. But you can see from this graph, more activity brings more benefits at every level. We focus on the early and mid-stage because these are the health-enhancing zones. You can see also that risks increase, but in the early stages of doing some moderate-intensity physical activity, the risks are low. This summarizes the evidence for us and is the basis from which we promote physical activity in the NCD arena. We need to. The data from the 2008 estimates show us global patterns, and as you scan this, you can see in each region it ranges from at best 20%, but at worst 50% are inactive. Data are available for men and women and show men are more likely to be active than women. We're very concerned about the levels of participation in women. We have less data on children, but they show a huge drop-off after the age of 12 to 13. We're very worried about this pattern that we introduce so early in life. You can see also the problem of inactivity spans all regions, including this, and in all levels of economic development. It's not just these benefits of addressing the big three, as I've called them here, cancer, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes, but there are multiple benefits: mental health, social health, community connectedness, social capital, child development, and education performance. The benefits from physical activity extend beyond the primary focus of today on the core NCDs, and it's an important agenda for many. And therefore, I shift now to not if and why, but in fact picking up the theme introduced on how. The political declaration introduced many of the key factors across all risk factors. It requires collective, multi-sectorial action. We need to address the determinants of the risk factors. Whilst focusing on providing individuals choice, we must look at the environments and the policy arena and work in multi-sectoral collaborations. If we're going to look and address physical activity, we must look at the causes of physical inactivity. Looking across this, you can see its position there as one of the 4 risk factors. But what are the causes of inactivity? Much work has been done in other regions, but far less in this region to fully understand the social, cultural, environmental, policy, and economic aspects to this. We must explore those, understand them, and act on them. How? The first thing we must do is implement the policies and documents that already lay out a roadmap for addressing physical activity. These are shown here. Firstly, the guidelines, the global guidelines on physical activity. I'll come to those in a moment. The global strategy also has a map for us, a laid out list of actions that we should be considering, and the applicability in this region, and indeed all the other tools. In Europe, those documents are many and perhaps not tailored to the region. So one suggestion for consideration is that the application of all these documents and policies need to be tailored, taking into account the cultural and social issues in this region, to look and provide more specific advice on action for these countries in this region. We also need to look at what specifics we can do. And one of the limitations in some of these documents is they're rather high level. And to introduce the idea that there are well-known interventions we can act on now, I'd like to turn to some work that has used the evidence, used the extensive research that's been done on many countries, in many countries, on many different approaches to physical activity, summarized in many leading guidance documents, notably these 2 being the USA Community Guide, in the UK the National Institute for Health and Clinical Effectiveness, Clinical Excellence. These summarize what we know and start to point to tangible things we can implement. Here I provide you a summary of those tangible areas, 7 of them. Time will not allow me to go into each of those very detailed, but I'd like to give you a flavour of each of them in brief, and this afternoon's round table will explore how we can implement these. The first is public education. I mention these because we have the global guidelines from 2010, a leading and at last consensus of global goals for physical activity, 30 minutes on most days of moderate intensity physical activity. We agree on that, we know that provides health benefits, let's implement those. On the left of this slide you see many country guidelines, there's also regional guidelines, but we already now have global guidelines. I'd suggest that this is one area where we can act now to adopt and implement those in each country in this region.